an economic miracle. Many experts agree it's the 20th century's most successful development story. Often called the Switzerland of Asia. Yes, we're talking about Singapore. Along with Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, Singapore is one of the 4 Asian tigers and has surpassed its peers in terms of GDP per capita, which is currently around $60,000. Singapore also has the world's highest percentage of millionaires, with 1 out of every 6 households having at least $1 million in disposable wealth. It's a very small city-state and one of the smallest countries in the world, at 733.1 square kilometers, or 283.1 square miles, and the main island lies right off the coast of Malaysia, which has a GDP per capita of $10,000. The other nearest country is Indonesia, with a GDP per capita of $3,800. So what's going on here? Gold, oil, gas reserves? Well, no. Actually, Singapore doesn't have any notably lucrative natural resources. How did Singapore become so rich? Watch till the end of the video to find out. Let's start with a little history. Singapore was part of many different European powers throughout the centuries, with Britain being the longest and last administrator. While Singapore was never sought after for natural resources, unlike many of its neighboring countries, Singapore's main attraction was its location. Singapore was nicknamed Gibraltar of the East, or Suez of the East, referring to its location in the Strait of Malacca. Historically, control of the Strait of Malacca was very important for both military and trade. The Strait of Malacca is the shortest transportation route between the Far East, notably China, and the Indian Ocean. The Strait of Malacca is one of the world's busiest canals, the transit point for merchant ships as well as giant oil tankers to the Middle East and Japanese ports in other parts of East Asia. In addition, the strait is of great economic importance for the countries of the region and the rest of the world. Approximately 60% of the world's maritime transport passes through the Strait of Malacca. The strait is home to more than 150 ships and tankers a day, mostly from China and Japan. In this sense, the Strait of Malacca is on the transport route of approximately 25% of the oil transported between the Middle East and Asia. With the increase in population and wealth of China and other regional powers, this ratio is increasing steadily. The Strait of Malacca plays a key geographical role for the entire Indo-Pacific region. For this reason, many countries in the region, including China and even the USA, are dependent on the Strait of Malacca, and especially Singapore. Singapore wasn't always wealthy and secure. Singapore became a republic in 1965 after independence from Britain and a short and rocky merger with Malaysia. Singapore faced the dangers of attack by the Indonesian military and forcible reintegration into the Malaysian Federation on unfavorable terms. The lack of good public housing, poor sanitation, and high unemployment led to social problems, from crime to health issues, with squatter settlements and slums common. At this time, the life expectancy was also very low. Besides the issue of sovereignty, the pressing problems were unemployment, housing, education, and the lack of natural resources and land. Unemployment was ranging between 10 and 12%, threatening to cause civil unrest. Singapore's leaders were aware of the benefits of the country's location. Strict laws were put in place around this time, which are still some of the sternest penal codes in the First World today. Also, there were efforts to revamp and improve the military to keep control of the valuable position in the strait. In the late 1960s and 1970s, things began to change economically when the government focused more on industrialization. Singapore also attracted big oil companies like Shell and Esso to establish oil refineries in the country, which by the mid-70s became the 3rd largest oil refining center in the world. This was also a perfect place for ships to refuel as they passed through the strait, which is still very lucrative today. Projects sprung up to provide affordable housing to resettle the squatters. Within a decade, the majority of the population had been housed. The government invested heavily in an education system that adopted English as the language of instruction and emphasized practical training to help develop a competent workforce well suited for the industry. Special tax incentives were put in place to attract foreign investment. Still, much of the international media was skeptical of prospects for Singapore's survival. Singapore later co-founded the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, which was to accelerate economic growth and through that social progress and cultural development with neighboring countries, also to promote regional peace and stability. With Singapore working to gain a reputation as a stable, corruption-free, and low-tax nation, this would eventually attract the foreign investment the country needed. A business-friendly environment was created. By 1972, just 7 years after independence, 1/4 of Singapore's manufacturing firms were either foreign-owned or joint venture enterprises, with the USA and Japan investing heavily in Singapore during these years. Between the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s, Singapore's gross domestic product experienced annual double-digit growth. Because of Singapore's measures to tackle education, by the 1970s, the country had a well-educated and skilled workforce. The main industries in the beginning of the manufacturing era were mostly simple electronics and textiles, but by the 1990s, they were engaging in biotech research, pharmaceuticals, aerospace engineering, state-of-the-art defense technologies, and notably complex semiconductors. Today, Singapore accounts for 11% of the global semiconductor market, and 20% of the global semiconductor equipment is manufactured in Singapore. Banking has also become a very important industry for Singapore, considered a global financial hub by many leading financial analysts, economists, and politicians. With Singapore banks offering world-class corporate bank account facilities, Singapore was ranked as having the 6th most competitive financial center in the world, and the 4th most competitive in Asia. Singapore has also attracted assets formerly held in Swiss banks for several reasons, including new taxes imposed on Swiss accounts and a weakening of Swiss bank secrecy. Credit Suisse, the second largest Swiss bank, moved its head international private banking to Singapore in 2005. For this, the country has also been dubbed the Switzerland of Asia. Also currently, there are over 3,000 multinational corporations operating in Singapore. Another very important industry for Singapore is transshipment, where unloading of goods from one ship and its loading into another to complete a journey to a further destination. The Port of Singapore is also the world's largest bunkering port. The port is the world's busiest port in terms of shipping tonnage handled, with 1.15 billion gross tons handled in 2005. Singapore is also a very important hub for connecting air travel in the region. This has also helped the country attract tourists. Currently, tourism contributes $12 billion to Singapore's GDP. Also, the Singaporean government invests heavily in 2 sovereign wealth funds with combined assets of over $900 billion, which are some of the biggest in the world. Singapore's economic strategy produced real growth, averaging 8% from 1960 to 1999. Since the nation's independence in 1965, Singapore's GDP has amassed an average of a 9.5% increase, followed by a 9.9% for 2000. Singapore is an incredibly wealthy country, but because of the mass private wealth, this has in turn caused some income equality issues. The Gini coefficient, which is used to measure income inequality, is 0.45. Anything above 0.4 usually represents a large income gap. There's also an issue with low birth rate, which creates dependency on migrant workers for many sectors. Also, while technically a democracy, Singapore's system of government is very autocratic and technically called a unitary parliamentary republic. Lee Kuan Yew, for example, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, was in office from 1959 to 1990. This type of government, while technically not negative, theoretically, this can be seen as less free and potentially could cause social unrest. In conclusion, Singapore has gone under an incredible transformation since its independence. It has gone from one of the poorest nations in the world to one of the richest in less than half a century. In many different industries, Singapore is the perfect middleman. The country is predicted to keep growing well into the future. While Singapore has been blessed with a perfect location, it hasn't been so lucky in other aspects. Climate change is a major threat. As a low-lying island, the rise in sea level poses the most immediate threat to Singapore. Much of the nation only lies 15 meters above sea level. So, what's in store for Singapore's future? Put your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more videos just like this. Thanks for watching.